Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel. Yes, you know it's me. You know the voice. Hope everybody's having a great week. Little caucus going on out there in my former home state. I used to live in Nevada. I lived in Las Vegas for 13 and a half years. That's going on today, so by the time you're listening to this, that will be over. I'm sure that Donald Trump will win. That's just the way it goes. I'll get a little more into that in a second. Been having a good time with my parents down here. Can't believe they've been here for almost 2 months. The time has flown. I don't know where the time goes. I went to a writers group that I'm started going to, and we hadn't gotten together for 2 weeks, and it seemed like yesterday. We get together over here at the Madeira Beach Library, and honest to God, it seemed like we were just there on Friday. Do you think it's really true that as you get older, the days go faster? I'm not sure of that or not. I think the days go fast for me just because I'm busy. Busy getting ready to do this show, the preparation for this show, and then everything afterwards that I have to do with this show. Uploading it to all the different places that you can hear it, and you hear me talk about that every show. Podbean, Podomatic, YouTube, SoundCloud, that all takes time. And then I'm working on my books, marketing for them, editing them. So I guess being busy helps. But I remember going back to like college when I had my summers off. And I worked for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation as a flagman. Yeah, I did that job. I know all about that. I was all over Armstrong County in the early 90s, walking around that area during the summer. Those summers seem to go fast too. Snap the fingers, gone. So I'm not sure. It's just kind of weird. But I enjoy going to my writers' groups. I actually have 2 different groups that I go to, different people, and I'm going to kind of avoided that for so long for different reasons that I want to get into. But now that I'm going to them, I think I'm going to enjoy it. Before I get into the politics tonight, you can email me at edwarddentzel@reagan.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Dentzel Domain, all one word, no space in between. I mentioned the Nevada caucus before. I don't think that anything in Nevada is going to be any different than what happened in South Carolina or in New Hampshire. I think so far, certainly Iowa has been the odd man out in all of this, with Ted Cruz winning. Since then, Donald Trump has won quite easily, and everybody's else is fighting to pick up the scraps. That's going to happen in Nevada today. I don't know who's going to come in second or third or fourth. Really have not looked into it that much. There hasn't been a lot of polling in Nevada. Nevada is notoriously a hard state to poll because having lived there, I can tell you, first of all, it's odd that most of the industries there are 24/7. The big industries, anything that's connected to the casinos, the casinos run 24/7. So you have a population, a lot of whom work odd hours, and they don't work Monday through Friday. So it's hard to get in touch with a lot of those people. I lived in Las Vegas for 13 and a half years. I didn't have a normal schedule any year. Now, granted, I worked in entertainment. I had some regular jobs too. But most of the time, I worked on weekends. That's the way most of it goes. And what you run into there is you have people who are teachers during the day, and they're car dealers at night. You can do that. A lot of people do that in Las Vegas. A lot of people have 2 or 3 jobs. I knew a guy who worked for the water company, whatever it was called, in Las Vegas. At night, he played the trombone in a Rat Pack tribute band. So people have 2 jobs, 3 jobs. I knew women who were dancers in 3 different shows, worked day shows, then night shows. And so you can't get good polling out of there at all. And of course, polling overall, no matter what the state is, it seems like it's getting worse from cycle to cycle as well, doesn't it? But I think what we've seen in New Hampshire and South Carolina is going to happen. And once again, by the time you're listening to this, happened in Nevada. Now, what we can be sure of, though, after talking about what I did yesterday, it doesn't seem that Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio are any closer to coming to some sort of agreement. In fact, today, it seems less likely more than ever. Yesterday, Ted Cruz got rid of his communication director, I think for very good reasons, and not just the reason of this ad that went out. It says Marco Rubio pointed at the Bible and said, "You're not going to find any answers in there." How something like that, and it's something that was so wrong, so it was the complete opposite. What Marco Rubio actually said and what Ted Cruz's campaign marketed as were the complete opposite. It wasn't just parsing and dicing the words. It was the complete opposite on purpose, is something. And I think that Ted Cruz had to do that. Of course, this doesn't help the Ted Cruz campaign and the point of view that he and his campaign are liars. Of course, this goes back to Iowa and what happened there. What exactly happened there? Did they mislead Ben Carson supporters, saying that Ben Carson was going to drop out, and that is continuing to stick around? I don't think that's what actually happened, but it doesn't help. And then there's a photo of Marco Rubio shaking hands with Barack Obama. It's certainly, how do I want to put this? And then you have some ads which have been pretty decent. There's the Office Space one with Hillary Clinton, a lookalike Hillary Clinton, stomping on her server, which was very clever. Kind of an unusual, let's put it this way, for Ted Cruz, a guy who, I don't know, just personally doesn't seem like the coolest of cats. To come out with some of these ads, it's certainly different than he is. Usually the ads are a representation of who the candidate is. You can't say that in some cases in Ted Cruz's case. But he had to get rid of that guy. And what was his name? Rick Tyler? His name. Some of these names, they just go in my eyes and then totally out of my brain. I just know that he got rid of them. At some point, the names hardly mean anything. You can just say Ted Cruz's communication director, and you know what I mean. Now, also, Ted Cruz has extended an apology to Marco Rubio for that ad. And in return, Marco Rubio's, at least his communication director, and there wasn't any niceties in the response, saying, well, he came and apologized, but that still doesn't excuse and him lying. And there's just no love between those two campaigns. And it's a little surprising because for months, we were told, and maybe this even was before the presidential season started, that Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz got along fairly well. They're not getting along well now. And that hurts all of us. I don't need to go over and over and over why these two should make some sort of deal. I've told you my idea, and I've read, since I told you it, I've read other people's ideas about what they think should be done. It's just not going to happen. And that is a flaw of the candidates. And this is exactly the reason that I don't play hero worship. That's why I don't do it. Because these are, as I said yesterday about adversity, these candidates, except for Donald Trump, are facing adversity, and we're seeing what their character is. And it's occurring to me that they're thinking of themselves first. That's not unusual. We all do it. We all do it. If we were on the Titanic, all of us would be thinking about how we're going to survive, not how we're going to get everybody else to survive. It's just human instinct. Now, it may, after a couple minutes, you may figure, well, you know what, this and that, and you may start helping other people. But the knee-jerk reaction for people is, how am I going to survive? How am I personally going to survive? Or, how are those people very close to me, my wife, my children, my husband, how are they going to survive? You don't think about strangers first. And that's what you're seeing here. Ted Cruz wants to be president, so he's not going to give in. Marco Rubio wants to be president, so he's not going to give in. Now, they both don't want Donald Trump to win, but they still think that they can beat Donald Trump one-on-one, and that may be the case, but how are you going to get there? They have no idea. Well, they do have an idea. I just don't know if it's workable. Ben Carson's not dropping out. John Kasich isn't dropping out. And they're even more delusional than I think Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio are right now as far as how this is all going to happen. Who do they owe it to? I don't know. If I'm one of those guys, if I'm either Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, I wake up every day saying, why am I running the race this way? I just got beaten in New Hampshire. I just got beaten in South Carolina. Why did I lose? The answer is both of those guys, Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, lost because the votes for them are getting split up 4, 5, 6 different ways. Mm-hmm. And they think that, well, if I keep running, those guys will eventually drop out and those voters will come to me. And that's a perfectly rational decision. The problem is that you have another candidate. If it was just, let's just say it was this way. If it was Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, and there was no Marco Rubio, it was John Kasich and Ben Carson, let's say. There was only 4 men continuing to run. And the percentages were whatever they worked them out to be. You can add it up any way you want. And Ted Cruz was falling well behind Donald Trump, but he was still well ahead of John Kasich and Ben Carson. He could say, you know what? All I have to do is put these 2 unpopular guys. All I have to do is knock those 2 out of it, and I got this. That's not what's going on. You have one guy who's hugely popular right now, getting 30-some% of the vote, and you have 2 guys who are getting in the low 20% range. And they both have plenty of money, plenty of support. Now, Marco Rubio is continuing to rack up the endorsements. I don't think he's going to be hurting for money anytime soon. But in getting those endorsements, he may be actually hurting himself. It'll allow Ted Cruz even more to say that he's the outsider here. He's not the billionaire businessman. He's not the guy getting all the endorsements from senators and governors. And so he's going to have a reason to stay in. And he's going to get money from that, just like Marco Rubio is going to get money from getting all these endorsements. And Donald Trump's going to continue to do what he does. It's fascinating. Like I said, if you're a political scientist, this is fascinating to you. If you're a sociologist, fascinating. Psychologist, fascinating. If you're not, and it's fascinating, of course, if you're a Donald Trump supporter. For everybody else, it's completely agonizing, and it's gonna drive us to drink. But there's not going to be any agreement now. I don't think. I don't know. As I said last week, the longer this goes, the deeper the divisions are going to be between these four other guys. No matter how much they attack Donald Trump, the division between these four guys is only going to get worse, not better. Because Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, they're going to be bitter at John Kasich and Ben Carson for sticking around when they have no shot. Marco Rubio is going to be bitter at Ted Cruz for his reasons, thinking Ted Cruz is a liar. Ted Cruz is going to be bitter at Marco Rubio because he's lying about a little illegal immigration, and that's only going to continue. And all of them don't attack Donald Trump as much as they should because they believe that time spent attacking Donald Trump should be time spent attacking one of these other guys who are more likely to drop out. It's, like I said yesterday, the classic prisoner's dilemma. But in the end, it's we who get screwed. And going back to these guys, I wonder when these guys wake up every day that they think about us at all. This is why I don't get into hero worship. I'm going to say it again. For all you people who are Donald Trump honks, or honks is a slang term for supporter, Ben Carson supporter, John Kasich, the rest of them, if you think that they get up thinking about you every day, you're wrong. They may be conservative, they may be moderate, they may be decent presidents, but right now, in this primary season, as of February 23rd, 2016, they're thinking about themselves and how they get to stay in the race. They're not looking at a year from now at a case where Hillary Clinton could be president or Donald Trump could be president, both of which would be disasters. Bernie Sanders being president, no. They're thinking, I got to stay in this for another day. If this was some type of other situation, if this was a marathon where it's a very individualist pursuit, it's just running, just you and the pavement, man. That's all you. Just you and the pavement. There is no teamwork in marathons. There is no teamwork in marathons. This isn't marathon. This is something different. These people, if this is a marathon, a political marathon, those guys running are out there for the spectators. And it should be the concern of the spectators who are first, and not just the ones who support them. Not just, Ted Cruz should be more concerned than just about the people who support him. Same way goes for Marco Rubio, Ben Carson, John Kasich, and dare I say it, Donald Trump too. But I don't think that's the case. These guys get up every day. The other four, Donald Trump doesn't have to do it as much because he's leading right now. They just think about, how do I stay in this for another day? How do I do it for myself? Not looking at the long-term picture of what happens if you lose, if you don't make a deal with these other guys. Hey, you know the way I think. If the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union can come to some sort of deal after World War II, then these four guys can get together and figure out something as well. And I'm not even a big Ben Carson fan. I'm not a big John Kasich fan, both for different reasons. For different reasons. And I wouldn't vote for either of them if they got the nomination. But I understand they have a part to play. And I think that I could deal with them, work out some arrangement with them if I was involved in this primary process and I was in the position of Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio. I think I would. So it's frustrating. It's frustrating. I don't know how frustrating it is to the people who are these hardcore supporters of Ted Cruz. They love it. They love that Ted Cruz is sticking in. And not going to make any deals with Marco Rubio. And Marco Rubio's people love it that he's sticking around and not making any deals with Ted Cruz or any of these guys. Same way with John Kasich and Ben Carson. But for all the rest of us who don't do that, who aren't going to spend any money on any candidate, aren't going to go to any rallies, we're conservative, we're Republican, but we don't necessarily get into that. We're not beholden to any particular candidate exactly. We're the ones who right now are getting screwed. So if you're waking up every morning with a little something going on, when you get a little depressed, when you think about politics right now on the Republican side, and you're not a Donald Trump supporter, and you don't support one of these other four candidates strongly, that's what you're feeling. I'm telling you, that's what you're feeling. You feel like you're getting screwed over by some guys that you want to vote for eventually. So it's bad. It's just bad. And I did that show yesterday. I recorded it before all that stuff came out about Ted Cruz's communication director, and it kind of just went all downhill from there. By the time you listened to my show last night, it was pretty irrelevant. I'll just admit it. They're going to battle it out to the bitter end because they see an opening. But it's a very dangerous game to play. And the point is that they can play it and get away with it. If they lose, like I said, Ted Cruz gets to go back to the Senate. Marco Rubio gets to go back to the Senate. Ben Carson can go back to being a doctor. John Kasich can go back to being governor of Ohio. It's going to be the rest of us that have to live with them failing. They'll eventually be fine. But we're the ones who will have to deal with it. And if they were thinking of us like they say they are, it's just funny to me anytime you hear a politician on any side say, "Well, I need my supporters, and my supporters deserve." Well, your supporters make up like 3% of the American population. How about the other 97%? What do you owe them? And I know half of those Democrats. What do you owe that 50% of the United States that actually wants to agree with you? What do you owe them instead of that 3%, those hardcore supporters that are showing up and volunteering for you? I know that you think you owed them something. I get it. They put in time for you. They've sent you money. But how about stop taking their money and stop taking up their time and just drop out? That would be doing them a favor too, because you have no shot. Just admit it. You're staying in for you. You're not staying in for them. You're staying in for you. Just say it. We all know. Don't treat us like idiots. Just say it. Don't give us something, John Kasich, about, we think we can come in second in Michigan. John Kasich polls right now, he's losing to Donald Trump in Ohio. And it's the same way with Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. Don't tell me that you can knock the other guy out in time to save the day and beat Donald Trump. You don't know that. That's a story you're telling. But you don't know that. You know how I know you don't know that? Because everybody else who's not affiliated with any campaign says the odds of that happening pretty low. I know only 5% of the delegates have been counted so far. And, have been tallied up. But at some point, those delegates are going to get to a point where it's, he doesn't have enough to win, but it's kind of like the end of a chess match. Where, yes, one guy has his king, another guy has his king and a castle, if you know how to play chess. Eventually, the person who knows how to checkmate a guy who only has his king, and you can do it with a king and one castle. There are still moves to be made, and the game technically isn't lost. I mean, if an earthquake hit right at that second, yes, the game wouldn't end, but the game, for all intents and purposes, is over. It's the same way with this. We will get to a point where, yes, Donald Trump hasn't gotten to that delegate count yet, but there's no stopping him from getting to that delegate count. And that's the point I worry about. And I think that it is closer than any of these other guys want to admit. But they won't drop out. They won't come to an agreement. All because of personalities. All because of rumors, innuendos, suspicions, egos, arrogance. You got it. You name any of just about any of these 7 deadly sins, you're seeing it. I don't know. As you can tell, I get a little fired up about this. And this is why I've told you that I don't look at this, even though this show and all the other shows are looked at it on Red State Talk Radio are as political shows, quote-unquote political shows. I don't like to think of it that way. I think this is more a conservative show. Because I don't like the politics of all of this. I think that if you're a true conservative, that you see the writing. That's part of, I think, who we are. We're supposed to be anyway. That we see the writing on the wall that sometimes somebody needs to give up for the greater good, not being forced. I'm not talking about sacrificing the few for the many, like purges in Soviet Union or anything. But at some point, a governor, a senator has to back out so that somebody else can win to stop something worse from happening. That's what I think the conservative thing to do is. The political thing to do is to stay in there and keep bashing each other's heads in. That's what I think. I just don't see a way that we get to a situation where Donald Trump starts losing anything if this is going to be the way it is. I just don't see that happening. Even in a 3-way race, even if John Kasich and Ben Carson were drop out, maybe all Cruz, Rubio, and Trump all start getting in the 30s. Just don't know. I'd feel much better about it if all of those guys, but either Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz dropped out. So 3 of them, and one of them having to be Rubio or Cruz. And not with either Rubio or Cruz sticking around. That's what I mean. I'm not having 3 drop out and Ben Carson still be the one left, or John Kasich be the one left. 3 dropping out with one of the two remaining being Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio. So that's what drives us nuts, because it's all about votes and demographics and what I can do here in this state and what I can do here in that state, and that wears me out. Wears me out. As a conservative who just wants to talk about theory, just wears me out. When it's so simple, well, would you give up? Yes, I would. As a matter of fact, I would. I would not want to take any chances of putting the power of the United States federal government in the hands of Donald Trump. That's what I know. if I was Ted Cruz, I'd go to Marco Rubio and say, what can we work out here? I know you think I'm a bad guy and everything. Let's just work something out. That's what I would do. But you've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I'll be back after this short commercial break.
Red State Talk Radio. Lock it in and rip the knob off.
I know you're watching, so pay attention. You hate my freedom, my religion, and my country. You hate me for speaking my mind. You try to control me with violence and intimidation. You think you can muzzle me with fear? Don't ever confuse me for my politicians or my media. I am an American, free-born and free-bred, and I will call you out for who you are. An Islamic extremist who would kill me for my beliefs. You don't intimidate me. My freedom is more powerful than anything you can possibly do, and I will never surrender my rights to your terror. I will say what I think, worship according to my beliefs, and raise my children how I see fit, and I defend it all with the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. I cower to no one, because I am the National Rifle Association of America, and I am freedom's safest place.
This is Donna Fiducia. For 26 years, I was a member of the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has failed you miserably. Red State Talk Radio will not fail you. Tune into Red State Talk Radio at redstatetalkradio.com, the dominant force in conservative Internet talk radio.
I lost my brother Frank in the Battle of Iwo Jima.
He served on 4 combat tours.
In Vietnam.
In Iraq.
Afghanistan.
There's a life that was lost behind that pin.
I put it on for my wife.
For my husband.
My brother.
My dad.
My son.
We wear it because we honor those that we lost.
To learn more about the stories behind the Gold Star Pins, visit goldstarpins.org.
This is Jeff Carlisi from the Band 38 Special. You're listening to Red State Talk Radio. Lock it in and rip the knob off.
Back to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I should tell you that continuing on this just for a couple minutes, I don't want to spend most of the first part of the show on that. I want to move on to a couple other things. At redstate.com, the other Red State, there's an excellent article there about how with John Kasich and Ben Carson sticking around, they're actually giving votes, literally giving votes to Donald Trump. Because there are certain states where if you don't get a certain percentage, if you don't get like 10%, those delegates that you would have gotten had you gotten to 10% automatically go to the person who finished first. And Ben Carson, John Kasich have no hope of getting 10% in any upcoming state. Maybe John Kasich gets 10% in Michigan, whenever that is. So all these, they'll be running, and all the while, they'll be giving votes to Donald Trump. Whereas if they weren't involved, then some of those delegates would be going to Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. So there's that as well. So I will link to that at edwarddentzel.com so you can see what I'm talking about there. Once again, some of the intricacies of how they figure these delegates out. I I guess it's easier to figure out than what they do on the Democrat side, where it just seems it's like willy-nilly. Let's move on to something else. Apple versus the government. It's still going on. I don't know if there's going to be any, if we're to a conclusion to this argument. Doesn't seem that Apple's going to give in. The government certainly isn't going to give in. But I've been to Red State, HotAir.com, Ricochet.com, various other places, National Review. Lots of different opinions on this and how people view privacy and what is the government actually asking Apple to do. And, you know, it's amazing to me how people on both sides can go off on all of these different possibilities and tangents and everything. And I told you last week that I can't naturally come down on either side of this, and I've told you why. On the government side, we know what the federal government was doing or has been doing and probably still is doing regarding information and data and collecting data on us and emails and Edward Snowden, NSA, all of that. We know that. So they've generated, you know, the attitude that the average American has toward the government and its attitude toward our privacy. The average citizen, you know, doesn't hold it in too high regard. All right, so but it's earned that. The government has earned that. That's not some conspiracy of any type. That is something the government has earned. It has earned the suspicion that citizens have against it. On the other hand, you have Apple, who, you know, they're not pristine in this argument either. We know that they have made concessions over the years to be able to do business in China and with other governments where people's rights aren't the main concern. And that Tim Cook, the CEO, that never comes up. He's never asked about it. He doesn't volunteer it. Makes me suspicious. And that's just what we know about. And I would include Google, Yahoo, and the rest of these companies who have bent over backwards to accommodate governments that don't like human rights. So there's that. And we know on top of that, the stories of Apple in China, and if you believe their sweatshops, and the problems that have happened over there. And once again, though, if that's where they want to build their businesses, they can do that. But when it comes then to a situation like they're in with the United States federal government, I can then use that against them. Those are your choices. You made those choices on your own. You chose to do business in China. You chose to do all that. You weren't forced to. So we can judge you on that. That's a choice you made. We are all judged on our choices. I believe in free trade, but I also believe that if you're going to go somewhere, people are allowed to hold that against you. I don't believe in tariffs or anything, but if people want to hold that against you, they have the perfect right to do so. So, you know, there is no easy answer in this. There's not. And anybody who says there is just lying on one side of the other. I could go to Ricochet.com, a perfectly fine website. And most of the people there fall on the side of siding with Apple, despite the fact that a guy like Richard Epstein, a well-known constitutional lawyer, teacher, does a podcast at Ricochet.com that everybody likes. They'll argue with him over the law regarding what's going on here. And it goes back to the 1789 Writs Act and everything, all the precedents created since. Average people will argue with him about that and tell him that he's wrong. Of course, he, looking at the law, comes down on the side of the government, of the federal government. The commenters, not that there are many, at Ricochet.com, come down on the opposite side. So what is the conservative position? This is what is forgotten in all of this. What is the conservative position in this? Now, what I also have seen, I should say, is a little bit of, can you call it hero worship if they're putting a company up on a pedestal? You see a lot of people who are Apple people certainly being a little biased towards their own, like everybody, we know people have Androids. You're either an Android person or you're an Apple person or an iPhone person. And these people playing up, Apple's done so much to encrypt its software, and if the government comes in, that'll be against Apple's business model. 98% of people who own iPhones don't even realize there's a dime of difference between their phone and an Android phone. They don't realize that with Android stuff, it's open source software, and with Apple, it's proprietary software that's encrypted. Most Apple owners, iPhone owners, have no idea about that. So if you hear anybody make that argument, well, people get by because Apple is encrypted and they're so worried about people's privacy, nobody cares. You know why people buy phones? Because they like how they look. Is it fast? Does it have a camera? Can I get my apps? That's it. They don't give a damn about encryption. All right? If people did give a damn about encryption, the Android phones would have gone out of business, would have never come into business. And I remind you, it's the Android phones that are gaining market share. It's the iPhones and Apple that seems to be losing market share. So if people are so worried about encryption, why is Apple and their iPhones losing market share? So there's that. Once again, on top of that, is there any proof that Android people, and I have an Android phone, are more at risk to be hacked than Apple people? I don't know. I'm sure there's some stat out there somewhere that I don't know what it is off the top of my head after doing all the research I do for this show and all the reading I do, tells me it can't be that big of a difference. But getting back to the conservative position, I just want to remind you all with the conservative position, taking the government out of it, taking Apple out of it. The conservative position is you follow the law. And if you don't like the law, you go about changing it. That's the conservative position. Apple is not taking a conservative position because they are defying the law. Now, if they don't like it, they're willing to fight it in court like they're doing. They want to do that. If they win, fine by me. I really don't care who wins in this. I just want the law to be followed. That's what nobody wants to talk about. Everybody has their definition of what the law is. In the end, the only thing that matters is what happens in the courts. The courts say that Apple should allow the FBI to do whatever it wants to do. If you don't like that, you're more than willing to go up to the Supreme Court. If you lose, and you just have to live with it. If you don't like it, then you change it. That is the conservative position. We cannot be like liberals who just decide to follow some laws. We'll follow the law now. We're not going to follow the law later. We'll get this law passed, but then we're going to avoid it. We can talk about that with taxes, with regulation, with environmentalist regulations. Liberals will go to huge extents to get this stuff passed and not follow it themselves. We can't be like them. In fact, one of the reasons, I've told you there's many reasons we've gotten into the situation that we're in the United States. One of the reasons that our country seems so messed up is because of that. We should make sure that every person follows the letter of the law to the end so we can find out just how unpleasant most of these laws are. But instead, what do? We give people breaks. We'll let you slide by. Yeah, we know that law's a little crazy. We'll let you slide by. No, everybody should have to stick to the laws till we find out how unpleasant they all are. A lot of them are, not all of them. A lot of them are. That's where true change, I have to use that word, true change comes from. But in giving Apple, in my opinion, a slide this time, then the law doesn't mean anything. And we are a country of laws, not of men. What they're talking about, people who defend Apple, are talking about a law of men. The law has been decided. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad. I'm just saying that's what it is. If you don't like it, go change it. We have the ability to do that in this country. If you don't like what the Writ Act says, or you don't like all the precedents and all the cases that have arisen because of it, then go change it. Instead, they just want to not follow it and keep, I guess, the law, and they want to somehow magically get judges and courts and juries to decide in a different way. That's how liberals think. Right? I know that we are the ideology that believes in rebelliousness. We attach ourselves to what happened at the Tea Party going back to the 1700s, much more than liberals do. And so I guess that's what I see coming out here. Well, the private company has to defy the government. The government's overreaching, and maybe. But here's something else. But it's still, in the end, you have to go by what the courts say. Unless you're willing to go out. Is Apple willing to go out of business because of this? See, that's the other point. If this is the hill on which you're going to fight on, are you willing to go out of business over it? Not my company. Can't say. But there is another part to this as well. And that is, it's funny that the people who were involved in the San Bernardino shooting, they think that the FBI should be allowed to get inside that phone. Now, granted, maybe they're not the most unbiased people in the world. But here's what I know. Here's what I'm sure of. For all of the people who are defending Apple. Once again, I'm not taking the government's position on this. I'm saying what the law is, how it's been defined, and what has happened in the courts. I'm not necessarily taking the government's position. I'm just telling you what has happened in the courts and what has been decided so far. And that's because that's how we're supposed to run this country, like it or not. Like it or not, that's the way. We are land of laws, not of men. Here's what I know. If that same iPhone was found on a playground, sitting on a swing, like one of the seats for the swings, sitting there, and some kid found it, picked it up, turned it over, and it had some terrorist name on it, proving that he was there. And somehow we just knew, yep, and had his signature on it. I think everybody in the United States would want Apple to open that damn thing up. I think. If a cell phone, if an Apple phone, like thousands of them, were found on playgrounds across the United States. So in the middle of the night, all these terrorists show up. They dump these phones, one on each playground throughout the United States. Somehow that's just theoretical position. Every person in the United States would want those things unencrypted. Would Apple still take the same position? Would they? There's another good example that you can take from history regarding all of this. Regarding Apple doesn't want to do this because they believe it's going to open their, crack their phones open, and they won't be a safe. The phones will be able to be hacked by the government because the government won't have this key. What would have happened starting to World War II? And every manufacturer in the United States said, you know what? We're not going to go along. The U.S. government wants us, Chrysler wants us to start making tanks. You know what? We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. And all the other car manufacturers, all these other companies that got into making boats and everything else, all their private property, their materials, their employees, their blueprints, their patents, their trademarks, everything else, they said, you know what? We have private property rights. You can't make us do this. We're not helping in the war effort. What happens then? Remember, the reason that they want to break open this phone is because there might be terrorist information in there. We don't know if there is or not, but we are in a war against terrorists in the world. But what if in World War II the government wants to fight the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, and all of these manufacturers, all these companies said, nah, we're just not interested. And furthermore, they had patents on how to build tanks, and they didn't want to give them up to the federal government. Federal government says, okay, well, we'll just have to, I guess, build these things ourselves. Do you have any patents? And they said, no. No, we're not going to give them to you, because we give them to you, then those secrets might get into the hands of our competitors, and we don't want that either. We'd have to give up secrets regarding this new engine that we're going to come out with in a couple years, and we just can't have that happen. That's just going to hurt our business. It's going to hurt the customers that we have. We're going to lose customers. No, we're just not going to do that. How would y'all feel about that? Here's what I know. Would probably be speaking German instead of English by the time. Probably by this time in the year 2016. So there are limits. And we as conservatives, we recognize that. And that's exactly the reason I'm not a libertarian. Now, of course, with liberals, they'd just like the government take over private property and manufacturing, just period, no matter if there's a war going on or not. But the conservative position is that you follow the law, as bad as that law may be. And if, however, on the other hand, if you believe that it is so bad, like slavery or something, that you need to start a war over it, then I say to Apple, okay, go ahead. Go ahead. If it's that putrid a thing, then you should be willing to lose all of your business by going to war with the federal government. Are you willing to do that? If you are, I give you all credit in the world. At least you're living according to your values. See, I'm convinced that this is all nothing but marketing. I believe this is just the hugest show because I know what Apple has done elsewhere, not in the United States even, elsewhere, and how they've bent over backwards for dictatorial governments just to do business there. But in the United States, you know what's going on in the United States with Apple right now? Its stock is going down. Its iPhones are losing market share, as I pointed out elsewhere. Their computer sales are down. Everything on Apple is down, all since Steve Jobs died. To me, I see this as a marketing effort to them to get back into the news. And that nobody wants to admit that, on top of everything else, tells me something. Because it's obvious to me. This is just nothing but a show, but I'm not coming down on either side. As a conservative, I just want the law to be followed. If you don't like it, change it. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. You can get over Dentzel.com, where you can find all of my old Red State Talk Radio shows. You can also find them at Podomatic, Podbean, YouTube, SoundCloud. You can go to edwarddentzel.com/book to download the first chapter of my next novel, The Comebacks. That's for free. You can also find me at Facebook and LinkedIn. Find me on Twitter, Dentzel Domain, all one word, no space in between. That's all I got for you tonight. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.